Be seated. Well, since most of you come to church every Sunday, I sometimes think that this series of lessons was designed for a congregation where people come every other Sunday or every third Sunday, because it starts to get a little repetitive, this John thing. I'm in you, you're in me, as the Father's in me, and I'm in the Father, and love one another as I have loved you. And then it just keeps happening, and it's almost so redundant that you wonder, did he get stuck? Or my New Testament professor's theory was that John had all his notes on these sheets of note paper, and he tripped, and all the papers went in the air, and he fell, and that was his last moment on earth. And his disciples were left to try to figure out how to put it all together. And they kept finding where he rewrote it. And they decided, well, we don't know which one he really meant, so we're just going to put them all in. So it sort of feels like that. Like, yeah, okay, we get it, John. And then he repeats it in his letters. On the other hand, spending that many words on this must mean it was pretty important to the community of John. It was extremely important that they demonstrate a kind of communal life that was superior to the lives of the people around them. Morally superior, but also affectionately superior. That kind of care and empathy for people that are in your group. So this was an important thing for Jesus. It was important for the disciples. But in this piece which is a follow-on from last week, from the vine and the branches, we hear Jesus say, "You're no longer servants. I'm going to call you friends." Now this is a significant moment, because up to this point, Jesus is acting as the traditional rabbi, teaching rabbi with disciples. And they went about doing disciple-y things for their master. But in this moment, again, set in the context of the Last Supper, Jesus changes the dynamic. At least verbally he does. We don't know how the disciples received it. But to be taken from that place where you're the student to the friend, it's an important moment. My Old Testament professor in seminary was a gruff old guy. He got sober later on, but he was still a gruff old guy. He had flu every now and then, but he was the kind of guy who didn't like what his doctoral committee had said to him, so he told them to stuff it, and he said, "I'll just stick with a master's degree." Because he lived in a Frank Lloyd Wright home that looked out from the Cumberland Plateau, because his wife was a Budweiser heir of some sort. Anyway, it's always good to marry up. But that's all aside. So being a friend. So Mr. Griffin, as he told us from the get-go, I am not Dr. Griffin, I am Mr. Griffin. And he said, and we called him that until the end of the semester, 12 hours a week with him for a semester. At the end of the semester, if you were alive and passed, you could start calling him Bill. He was done with you. That was the way the curriculum was said. He was done with us. He'd said everything he had to say. He'd gotten all his axes ground, and now we could call him Bill. We were friends. He no longer had to evaluate us or grade us. This is the kind of moment, and as a young man, he had a booming voice and commanding presence, and very impressive guy. And the party at the end that he would hold in his home was the transition from Mr. Griffith to Bill. It was kind of a ritual thing that happened there. But it was this, all of a sudden, to be elevated by somebody that you respect and admire. So that leads to the other part of this verse, which is where I really want to focus, which is, you didn't choose me. I chose you. I appointed you to bear fruit. You did not choose me, but I chose you. Now, how many of you ever were in the playground situation where the two best people at whatever sport are the team captains and they're picking their teams for whatever it is? Now, maybe if you were a really good athlete, this was not a sweat for you. But for some of us, it was, please don't let me be last. Please don't let me be last. It was a frightening moment. And there was also, you kind of start sizing up who was ending up on which team. And he said, please let him pick me. Let him pick me. Because you could kind of tell who was going to have the better team. So you want to be chosen. But then again, let's think about the team here. Who would actually want to be chosen to be on the Jesus team? Seems like the Herod team or the Pilate team or the high priest team. Somebody's team had to be better than getting chosen to be on the Jesus team. All these other people had more of everything, including swords and crosses and authority and all soldiers, police. They had it all. And what was it like for these disciples to get chosen to be on the Jesus team and then told, as part of my team, one of the exercises you'll go through is bearing your cross? Really important exercise for my team, the cross part. Boy, it's almost like you don't want to get chosen for that team. What are the benefits of getting chosen for the Bear the Cross team? There's got to be something. There's got to be something. And for John, that something was that we were willing, not all to go be nailed to literal crosses, but we were willing to so give up self that we could create a beloved community. A community that would be beloved by God because it was filled with the love of God, being given and received, shared and expanded. It's an expansive gospel. Now, to be chosen to be on this team is also frightening. It's like if you get chosen to be on the really good team and the first baseman twists his ankle and you get put in, because you weren't going to really be put in much to begin with. But all of a sudden you're in a prime position on the good team. There's pressure. Don't hit it to me. Don't hit it to me. Strike out. There's these anxieties. All of a sudden, we're responsible for our part in the team. And that's where the giftedness, where John's, this whole big speech, you remember, happens. And then not any time after this, Jesus is in the upper room with them again, breathing on them and giving them his Spirit. Now you can't have a good team without team spirit. Can you? Well, what if the team spirit is the Holy Spirit? Now that's a little more than cheerleaders and pom-poms for sure, but a little more mysterious as to how it works. But for John, there can't be this community of love if there is not a free flow of the Holy Spirit, because we are selfish creatures by nature. I mean, we're at the animal part of ourselves. The selfishness is about self-preservation. Always. We think, however we think, however it looks, whatever damage it might do to anybody else, those things that I do for myself in general are done because I think they will continue my survival. Now, I may be utterly deluded that a pound of McDonald's French fries a day will save my life. I can have delusional ideas about it, but in general, the selfishness that we encounter on a daily basis are little habits we learned as children to survive our environment, or as teenagers, or as young adults. We pick up these ways of behaving or acting, attitudes that serve us in the moment and then later on don't, because they're not community building habits. You see, some of the teams out there only want to compete. They never want to cooperate. They thrive on the ego and the energy and the testosterone and all that stuff that jives them up. In order to get that feeling, somebody has to be beaten. There has to be an enemy, a competitor, somebody to outdo. And then I get to... And that's the Herod team, the Pontius Pilate team, the high priest team. That's the team of people who want power, control, and victory. Victory defined as I have power and control. I've won. And I only know I've won if somebody else has lost, so I can compare myself to the losers. These are the successful teams. You can get rich on those teams. You can get powerful on those teams. You can abuse people and get away with it on those teams. But you can't do that and be on the Jesus team. We got to choose. Can't be on both teams. Well, maybe in Sandlot baseball, sometimes the only guy who's got a catcher's mask has to be the catcher for both teams. But in general, you have to be on one team or the other. The one where you're sharing the face mask, that sounds like a Jesus team. Because somebody's willing to play both sides so that the game can be played for the sake of everybody. And maybe they're a little selfish. They like to wear their face mask. But the point is, the Jesus team is not a competing team. It is a cooperating team. It is an engulfing team. It is an embracing team. It is an including team. It is a team that picks the worst player first, so that that player doesn't have to sit and wonder, who am I going to be on last? Or they can just count it up and say, oh, I'm going to be on his team. I'm last. No. In the Jesus team, you get picked first. So different than the world we live in. It's so different than the world John lived in. So if we think he was talking because it was easy back then, he is emphasizing it over and over and over again to say we are a different kind of people. And if we live that way, then Christ's name will be glorified. And our lives will be better in general, seems to me. And maybe I won't get rich or powerful or famous, but maybe I'll be content and at peace with God